Go ahead. We are broadcasting now.
Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Will Stewart. I'm here in Minnesota. You can't quite see the snow. I'm a fourth grade teacher in Spring Lake Park, which is just outside of the metro area. Actually, it's in the metro area technically. We're on spring break, so that's why I'm able to be here with you today, and I'm very excited and really appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit about Edji. Edji it's a portmanteau of education and emoji. That's where we started. We started 2 years ago with the idea that students might talk about the text more and think more about the text if we gave them emoji as a tool for annotating instead of just kind of the traditional highlight and write down in the margin what you think. So that's where we started. And 2 years later, we've added a lot of other ways of interacting with the text, and we've really grown to think more about how can we get students discussing ideas in real time. That's what Edji is all about. We tend to use a lot of lingo that assumes it is text that students are talking about, but I think you'll probably see today that much of what I and other teachers do with Edji has to do with images, historical artifacts, political cartoons, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I saw that on Twitter, and I was like, oh my goodness, I never even thought of like a chart or an image or something like that.
Yeah, well, awesome. I'm glad you've seen a little bit of that on Twitter and have a little bit more background on what we use it for. And I always like to start off any training by just saying, I'm going to tell you some ways of using it, but the best ways that we have seen Edji used are not things that we've mentioned in training. They're things that people came up with on their own and then shared back with us. So this is just more of a session to tell you about the possibilities that exist with Edji rather than what we think you ought to do with it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch over to screen sharing, and you'll be able to see, kind of what it looks like for me as the teacher. And then we'll go through it and you'll pretend that you're my class.
Okay.
All right. Do you guys have devices with you today? Okay, awesome. So what I'll have you do is enter that code at edji.it. All right, it looks like somebody's joined me.
And is it case sensitive? No.
It isn't. You can type it in uppercase or lowercase. One thing I've noticed with students who use iPads is sometimes the iPad will add a space to the end of things, and spaces are a problem. Okay. So it needs to be just those four things, no spaces.
Yeah, we used it once, and kids were able to go in with the codes. I just printed the codes up on paper for them because they were in groups, and I told them, like, here's your code, type it in. And they were able to do that. But that's good to know.
Perfect.
I have a while you're waiting thing.
Yeah, me too.
Yep, you're in the right spot.
Okay.
So if your training experiences are anything like mine, a lot of times as I'm hearing about a tool, I kind of start wondering, okay, what am I going to do with this? So, while I'm going over how to use Edji, if there's something that's review and you want to just sneak off for a second and follow those steps, feel free to do that. We'll come back to this towards the end, and I'll kind of walk you through creating a reading.
Okay.
All right. So like we were talking about, you can use Edji to comment on text, PDFs, or images. So just to kind of get an idea of where people are with using Edji, if you don't mind going down to that little blue rectangle and just clicking somewhere between the left and the right and showing me what you know about Edji, and then use a few emoji to show me, how you're feeling today. And as you guys are commenting, you'll notice that over on the right side of my screen, I have what's called the Fire feed open. And the Fire feed is just a live broadcasting of what is being said in the reading. So I open that up by clicking down here. I can see there are already 3 comments. And as you type in your comments, they pop up on the Fire feed. So earlier on, I shared glasses and sunglasses because I think it's really cool that you're willing to take a closer look at Edji with me. I see Bev has, looks like maybe some swirly eyes and an upside down smiley face. So if she were my student, I might ask, why'd you put that? What are you thinking? How is that making you feel? Can you elaborate? And that's one of the things that I kind of love about the emoji is it's a good conversation piece for getting people talking.
Now, did you have to go into the emojis to do an emoji?
I just hit the emoji. No. Like, I just went here.
It's coming up as a text for me.
Or maybe that's okay. Delete.
Okay.
Right there.
And then the emoji.
And I hit the emoji.
Okay. Well, thank you. End of the day blues here.
So it looks like most of us are, well, all of us are new to Edji, and that's good for me to know. To give a little background on what we have done with Edji, the features we have built, this is something that we reference a lot. It's a strong readers versus struggling readers. What are the differences in terms of mindset and how they go about approaching a task? So really what we're trying to get students to do is make connections, ask questions, use strategies that they have learned, and just to think and talk. Those are our big focuses. And as I go through Edji and what it does and how it works, you're going to see that all of these tools some way connect back to that central idea that we want students to be thinking and talking and discussing and getting creative with how they interpret what they see. And I see over on Firefeed that Bev asked, how in depth can students who struggle go with this tool? Going back to what I said at the beginning about we don't really want to tell you how to use this, just show you what you can do. I've had students from all different levels and who might be classified based on a variety of different characteristics. They've all had success with Edji. Oh no, that's fine. Edji actually started in my classroom a little more than 2 years ago. My students who were 70% English language learners were reading a text about the American Revolution, and a student explained well, I'll tell you what they wrote down, and you see if you can tell me what the event was. They put an angry face, an American flag, a greedy face, and a British flag, and then they put a ship and a crate. And that was the Boston Tea Party.
I was right.
And this was a student who hardly ever spoke in class. And when I asked him what he was doing, he explained in great detail what had occurred in Boston, and other students started weighing in. And in the end, we had a 45-minute discussion about whether or not the British were, quote, greedy. Were they truly greedy or were they reasonable? And
so this could potentially, all the students, from what I see, the students can do a couple of things. They can add an emoji to a text, like feel a sense of purpose in what they're reading. They can add an emoji like a smiley face, and then we can have a conversation based on that. But they can also add a question like what I added and then that could pose a discussion. But this is not a place where the students can have a discussion on this. It's more of a tool to promote discussion and kind of start the discussion. Is that what you're saying?
I think it could be done both ways because you have the option of letting them see each other's comments or not seeing them. So it could be more of an independent thing, but you can see everybody everybody's results, or you could have them seeing everybody's.
I feel like with the emojis, though, if you really wanted to have a conversation, I feel like the emojis would be a start. Like you said, the crate and this and that, and a sad face or an American flag, and something like if you were doing something on immigration, everybody would have like the wall, for example. Just saying, the wall would give everybody would have a different emoji, and then you could have a discussion based on who put this emoji. You're all in one group. Talk about why you put that emoji there, and like it could be a basis for how to group kids. You know,
that's a good idea.
Sorry.
No, this is great to hear, and I love talking about this. I think it was Lisa said you could do both, and that's what I would say too. It certainly can be used either way, and our goal is never to replace discussion entirely, just to give some students who might not otherwise participate in that discussion a route. So yeah, it can be used to jumpstart a talk about are the British greedy face. It could also be something where, you know, students can be engaging back and forth while the entire class reads. So a good example, last week, my students were reading a text about urbanization and some of the struggles that small towns have as businesses close and, you know, people don't want to live in a town without a restaurant. A student asked, what happens first? Do people leave because there aren't any jobs? Or do jobs stop coming to the city or to the little town because people leave? And while we continued to read the text, my students, a handful of students went back and forth around that question, really kind of a back channel chat. And I could see that discussion happening over here on the Fire feed. And it was really helpful because I knew those students were making sense of the text in their own way. But the other students who weren't particularly interested in that or weren't ready to talk about that topic could continue reading with me. So it's an either or and an and or kind of thing.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So not that I feel like this is not something that the teacher has to look at, but is there any way to filter the results that the students, obviously you either pick whether the students see each other's or not. However, is there any way like that I can go in and just delete an answer because that doesn't pertain to what we're talking about? But obviously that would be a classroom management thing. I understand that aspect of it. However, is there any way for the teacher to go in and manually say, no, this is not appropriate. There's no way, kind of like a Kahoot where the person's name is not appropriate. You can go in and just delete it instead of having to sit there and linger.
Yes, there is. If I wanted to get rid of a comment as the teacher, and only the teacher can do this, I can scroll up. Well, actually, I should back up. Students can delete their own responses.
Yeah.
As the teacher, I have the power to delete anybody's response. So I could click on this question that Bev asked, and if I wanted to, I could click delete, and it would be gone. No one would see it. The second thing that also works really nicely with Firefeed. Originally, we built Firefeed as a way for teachers just to see what students were saying. But one of the things that I have found to be really fun with the Firefeed is I actually project it up onto my smartboard or up onto the wall. And that does a few things. One, it allows me to easily just glance up and see what are my students talking, what are they thinking about. Another thing is the students really enjoy it because it's kind of a Jumbotron effect. You know, it's like being at the game and all of a sudden you see yourself up on the big screen. That they like that, like, wow, my idea matters. It's up on the wall where everybody can see it. And that kind of leads to the third thing, which is they police themselves. They don't want to be up on the wall with something that makes them look foolish. And they know that if it's up on the wall, people are going to see it. So writing butt face isn't really... There's no value in doing that because, you know, people are going to see it. They're not going to think any more highly of you, and you're going to get in trouble for it. So I can honestly say I've had zero issues with students writing inappropriate things, at least in my class, and I teach fourth graders.
Yeah, I was going to say with fourth graders, I can understand that. With high schoolers, I feel like sometimes they do it for the reaction of other students. So, but that is good to know that you can edit their thing. I'm sorry, their comments.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I appreciate you sharing that feedback with me.
I see here when you go into, I mean, I'm down here on the flow chart. Sorry, I've kind of been skipping around. When you go to the flow chart that you have an emoji, a text, and then you have this like gray area with a microphone.
Yeah.
Orange. What is the microphone? I mean,
so the microphone. Yeah, so we have the free version is pretty much what I've showed you today. We do have a premium version called Hero. Lisa actually has it. And one of the tools that comes along with that is the ability to make voice comments. And the voice comment is 60 seconds of audio.
Okay. Now, they don't have that for the iPad yet, though, right?
No, not yet.
And that's what our students are. They're one-on-one with iPad.
Okay. Yeah, and we are working on making it work in there. Apple is a little bit kind of more careful about allowing people to access the microphone than most other tools. So it's kind of a good news, bad news thing. But yeah, we are working on making it function on the iPads. It's really just a matter of the microphone being kind of a private thing on iPads.
Now, for Edji, is there anything that you can bring in, like another app or service that would do that, like SpeakPipe or something like that, or no?
I'm unfamiliar with SpeakPipe, but are you kind of asking, like, could you add audio from another source into your text? Was that a yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's something that we're hoping to work on in the future, but is not a feature yet.
Okay.
So it sounds like people or at least some of you are already down to the flowchart of how to set up a reading.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna stop at the picture of the coffee harvesting machine and the text about coffee, just to briefly talk about some ways that I have used Edji with my students. But the ways that I've used it, I think, would be very pertinent even at the high school level. So on an elementary setting, we're working on things like identifying, the subject of a text, or identifying, the topics within it, even what is a noun or what is a proper noun. So in those cases, I might ask students, highlight all of the proper nouns that you see in this text. And so then they would be going through and highlighting kapha or Baba Budan. And then I could see, okay, these students do understand what a proper noun is. These students don't. If you're not familiar with heat vision, that's another thing that Edji does, is it shows you what parts of the text are most popular. So if a bunch of students highlight kapha, it's going to start to turn yellow, then orange, then red.
Interesting.
And by looking at that, I can start making decisions about who needs help. Does the class as a whole get this? And I can move on. Things like that. More at a middle school or a high school level, I might ask them to find, okay, what is the section of the text that tells me, how Arabian leaders protected coffee? And then I would wait to see what sections of the text do they highlight. So that's a prescriptive use. That's me telling the students what to do with it. But more often, what I like to do is give them the text, teach them the skill that I'm looking for, like, looking for important details or evidence that the text is a sequence text, and then wait to see what they find. In other words, teaching the skill and then seeing how they apply it.
Can you see this in real time?
Yes.
Like you see that people are highlighting them in yellow and red and
yes.
all those things. Okay. So this is an easy way to monitor from even walking around what they're highlighting and if they're highlighting anything.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up if they're highlighting anything at all. We also have a tally, which I don't use a ton because I'm mostly looking at the fire feed, but it is a nice tool to see who is participating and who isn't. So I can see that Bev is really thinking about this text a lot. She's really engaging with it, interacting. I can also see that, maybe Lisa isn't totally understanding what we're talking about, or maybe she's distracted, so I might want to check in with her.
Yeah, and I used the tally actually for the students that did for the 2 days looking at Prius's speech. I told them that they needed to have so many comments and so many comments to other people, replies to other people. And then I went in and looked at the tally, and if for like my on-grade class needed 5, who had 5, but then I could click and look at that person's 5. Were they mostly emojis? Were they mostly text?
It's an easy way to just go to that direct person.
Right. So, I mean, I found it very nice to see. And then I could look at the feed and see their discussions and see how they were talking about the text.
That's a great way to use it, and goes right back to what I was saying, that we don't really want to tell you how to use it, just to show you the possibilities of what Edji can do and how it can get students thinking about the text or images. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, I like that you can actually take an image and have them highlight like you did at the beginning with the arrow, and have them comment on that even. That's interesting.
One of the things that, so I teach a language arts social studies class. We've integrated the 2 subjects. And one of my favorite things to use Edji for is analyzing a historical artifact. So with it, I guess it was last week, we were reading about the women's suffrage movement. And I showed the students a very high quality image from the Smithsonian, pictures that they had taken of Lucy Stone's wagon. She was a suffragist, published, I believe it was the Women's Journal or the Woman's Journal. And this carriage had been painted with all sorts of slogans, lists of states where women could already vote, how much the Woman's Journal cost, reasons why women should be given the vote. And I didn't tell my students anything, about this object. I just put the image in front of them, and I asked them to think like historians. I gave them a checklist to go through. What does it look like this is made out of? How do you think it was used? When do you think it was built? Where did it come from? All those kinds of questions that historians and archaeologists ask of themselves. And they spent 10 minutes, looking at it. And it was great because it preloaded the vocabulary for the text we were about to read. Someone used the word suffrage. Another kid asked, what's suffrage? And then they explained. They had a little side conversation. So everybody learned what suffrage was by looking at a wagon from 100 years ago.
And that's if you have everybody being able to view other people's. Yes.
Yep. So right now I have heat vision on, and there aren't a lot of comments in this text, but you can see, we can all see each other's comments. It's like we're in a room all together. And when I turn it off, it's kind of like a wall goes up between all of us. You guys cannot see each other's comments. As the teacher, I can still see everybody's.
Yeah, that was helpful. I had the kids, I made a different Edji for each group. And I had a group, spatially, they were having trouble with everybody being on the same dock. So I just turned off that, and then they were like, oh, that's better. They did their comments, and then we turned it back on so they could see everybody's.
And they could still have a conversation.
Right, but like they needed to first do the highlighting, and they were having trouble with that.
Why did that get small? That doesn't make any sense. How does one highlight? Because I'm trying to do it, I'm looking at like a brief history of coffee even. And I'm pressing the screen. I'm dumb, I guess. I don't know. Oh, see, that was stupid.
Then when you highlight,
okay.
And it shows you what you highlighted
Wait, what did you say?
I just
yeah,
you highlighted, then did the text.
Okay.
What you
okay, so it tells you. Okay, so can I see what that looks like on your end?
Sure. You'd like to see how to highlight, or you'd like to see what your comment appearing looks like?
What what my highlighting and comment looks like on your end, on the teacher's end.
Sure. So over on the right side of my screen, looks like you wrote good point about talking to me in the class.
Okay.
And that's,
okay.
Sure, go ahead.
No, that was it. You're fine.
And one of the things that we did with the fire feed is we sort of looked to Cornell Notes for inspiration of what's a good way to organize people's comments about a text. So when you look at the fire feed, what you're seeing is on top, it's what the student wrote. And on bottom, it's what they wrote it about.
Right.
So I'm thinking about the most popular story of the discovery of coffee centers around a goat herder in the 6th century. And that way I can look back and see what the students are thinking about.
Well, and if one student highlights, like you said, the heat vision is what you said. I'm sorry. If they all highlight the same thing and they all say good point, okay, let's delve that into a little bit further. Like, why is that a good point? You've all put that's a good point, but we don't know why. And that helps to create the discussion. Interesting. I like the heat because I teach Spanish. And so a lot of times with Hispanic things, like my students will just shut down. They'll just be like, I don't understand this. I don't know what's going on. And I like the fact that like I can highlight and say, highlight all the cognates that you know. And those are words that look like words in English, the same they're the same in English as they are in Spanish. So like if they were to, if everybody highlighted red, one word, I'm like, all right, we know what that word means. But nobody, like half the class didn't get this. Well, why didn't you get this? You know, kind of like give me an emoji of how you feel about this word. Like, I feel great. I know exactly what it means. Or, eh. So.
The only foreign language I've ever taught was English. So I don't really have much experience as a foreign language teacher. But thinking back to my experience in Spanish class as a student, it seemed to me that more so than in other subjects, I really had to rely on the people that were good at that. They had worked hard and they'd learned Spanish, frankly. That the whole class kind of looked to the 2 or 3 people in my Spanish class to explain to us what the teacher was telling us. And that kind of ties into how I've used heat vision is as a scaffold. I have heat vision off at the beginning. And then once the class has had time to make sense of it, I turn the heat vision on so that the students who don't really have any clue, you know, what is a noun or, you know, which of these words are colors can see what some of the more able students have pulled out of the text. It gives them a chance to peek inside of the mind of the stronger Spanish speakers in your class.
Interesting.
But again, I've never taught foreign language, so I don't know that that's how it goes. But just kind of conjecturing, that's a way that I have used it in my English class. That some of the students don't know, you know, what an adverb is, or they don't know what an important detail from the text is. So when I turn the heat vision on, I say, okay, now look through here and let's take a look at what our classmates thought were important details, and then we have a discussion about why so many people in the class thought that, you know, Ethiopian province was an important detail about the coffee text.
Okay.
I also like the graphic organizer with the community, home, and school. And then you would have people responding on there. And then be.
Yeah, so the is actually a screenshot from a reading that I did with my class. But when we got to the end of the reading, they were actually asked to select what area they wanted to work on for what I would call a mini project. It wasn't something that we spent a week on. It was something where they spent a day developing a solution to a problem. And by using the Venn diagram, it gave me some idea of what types of projects to expect. And it gave the other students a chance to see what their classmates were thinking so that they could team up if they had similar ideas, or they could reach across to somebody who's working on a school problem that was really similar to their home problem that they were working on. The particular project was issues that people with disabilities might face in our community, in our homes, or at our school.
So without having the hero account, they're able to do the heat vision.
Yep.
And the text and the emoji.
Mm-hmm.
And do they see the fire feed as well?
Yep. Pretty much everything I've showed you today is available to you for free, and always will be. We don't have any intention of getting you hooked on any of these features and then yanking them out from under you, or suddenly charging you to, add your 100th reading.
Okay. Now, could the teacher insert a recording in there if they have the hero feature for the students to listen to?
They can. And I've used that frequently for either read alouds or even, or like just making sure that the students know how to pronounce a really complicated word.
Okay.
And just kind of on the topic of hero, what we're looking at today is what the free version of Edji will look like forever. We don't plan on adding any new features to the free version. We're just going to continue to add features to the paid version. So things like the ability to insert images, or the ability to upload, audio, those kinds of things would stay on the paid side of the app.
All right. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or do you have any other questions?
I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm curious how it's going to work in a foreign language classroom, and I'm curious to see how far I can push it, I guess, with the free version, to kind of see how the students take it. If they do really well with it, or if they're like, I don't know what this is. Right. So I'm curious to try it before I really delve in, I guess.
I found my students, since they knew I could see their highlighting, and I also told them to, in the groups, talk, and I made the groups, and I told them to talk also, just not like respond on the Edji app. I found that a lot of them were talking, like, and having discussions while they were typing, and they actually were more cognizant of what they were doing.
And that's been my experience too. My class at this point is pretty much only used to using Edji. I mean, we've been using it all year. So for them, it's just kind of second nature. But when we first built it and first started using it, it was pretty profound to see the difference in how students went about thinking about the text, because it wasn't it wasn't just, maybe he'll be asking us questions about the text, or maybe we'll be discussing the text, or maybe he'll be asking what we think. It's just kind of built into it. I watch as things pop up on the fire feed, and I ask them, what did you think about that? Or students will look at each other's comments and will respond while the rest of the class continues to read together. And ultimately, that's our goal, is just to get students thinking and talking about ideas in real time. It's really about, having it in the moment.
I agree. It's a very good app. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you taking the time to hear a little bit about it. We're always there to answer questions or share ideas, and I'm excited to hear how you use it in your foreign language class. We have had some foreign language classes use it, but we haven't had a lot, and we haven't heard a ton about it. So I'll be curious to hear how things go.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you.
All right,
You're very welcome.
Sorry. I'm gonna stop the broadcast, but then I'll share the link with you so that you would have it, so that you could see how it's published on YouTube.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay. All right, you have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, you too, Lisa.
All right, bye-bye.